Okay, everyone, it's 10:30, so in the interest of keeping things rolling on time, first and foremost, if everyone could please go in the lower left-hand corner of their Zoom screen and make sure that you are muted. That would be very helpful. We are going to talk today about making HIPS high impact. So Jillian did touch on some of this, and my plan today is to go in a little bit more depth and talk about more specifics about each of those I guess she had like a list of 8 or 9 things. So we're going to try to dive into each of those a little bit further so that we all kind of walk away from here knowing kind of expectation wise what it means to have a high impact HIP. So the way I wanted to just kind of quickly start for us was to just put up the entire list of high impact practices that is put out by AAC&U. So these are all 11 items that are considered to be high impact practices. We are not going to talk individually about each of these, obviously, but in a larger, broader sense about how to make any one of these truly high impact for our students. The descriptions, AAC&U does have a sheet that's got kind of a quick and dirty description of what each of these actually means. So I recommend kind of visiting that, and I'll put that link up under my presentation resources as well. So the impact of HIPS, Jillian definitely touched a lot on that and data and that kind of thing. This is just kind of 4 little bits and pieces of those. So higher levels of deeper learning, a greater sense of belonging, higher persistence and perceived learning gains, and higher grades for underrepresented students. The last one here, higher grades for underrepresented students, I was actually part of a small study in the biology department where we did actually look at this when we introduced some team-based learning. And we did actually find that even over just a couple of semesters that we did see higher grades. So they can be very effective even within the short term. So how do we make them effective? What is it about doing a HIP that is key for us so that we do have a really strong impact on our students? So this is the list that Jillian put up. It's from this down here, the AAC&U publication by Koo and O'Donnell. And essentially what I'm going to try to do today is go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So, you know, what does it mean to have high performance expectations? Let's sort of spell those kinds of things out. So we'll try to hit all of these. Hopefully I will make it by the 11:10 timeframe. And if not, the slides will be there for you. All right, so our first one is, in fact, high performance expectations. And there are a number of things that are really important when you're setting up your class in a way that you're letting your students know that you do have very high expectations of them. You can't just tell them that you have high expectations. You really need to set it up in a particular way so that students understand what it is exactly that they need to do and what your expectations are. So in terms of the structure, your syllabus and in turn your Canvas page should be set up in a way that students really can go in and very quickly and very easily understand what is expected of them. From, you know, when assignments are due to how to manipulate the different Canvas pages and get to the different resources, what the student learning outcomes are, or what the learning objectives are for each particular unit that you're running. So you need to make sure that you are being incredibly clear with your students with regard to what you expect from them. The second thing is really communicating those learning outcomes and their criteria for success, so their framework for learning. So beyond sort of laying it out in the syllabus, maybe going ahead and either discussing that the first day or creating a short video on each of those learning outcomes and why they're meaningful, then students can have an opportunity, especially given that we're online, to go in and kind of get a little more information about each of those learning outcomes and how they actually need to approach those. When you're asking questions, ask open questions. And I know that can be difficult when you're doing online things, especially if it's asynchronous, but you can always set up a discussion board so that you can ask those open-ended questions. In addition, if you're doing synchronous, don't fear using the chat. You can always ask a student if they would mind being your chat monitor for the day. That's one of the suggestions that that I have found. Or a TA if you have a TA, but certainly students are generally willing to help monitor the chat. So if you do ask more open questions and pose those kinds of things, students can help you keep track of whether you're actually answering and helping to sort of push the conversation forward. The next piece in terms of your high performance expectations in really helping the students is to have frequent assessments. So the more frequent assessments that you can have that are low stakes, that you can provide feedback on, the better your students are actually going to progress through your course. If you simply have a midterm and a final, that's really not enough information for the students to truly change their performance from the midterm to the final and really expect that their grade's going to come up a whole lot if they weren't successful on that first one. So having low stakes assessments where you can provide them feedback, and feedback may simply be that you have an online quiz that's prepared, and instead of just returning the students an answer for number 1 was A, 2 was C, and things like that, you've actually taken the time to write a little blurb in there, like, you know, see page 136 in your text for a better explanation of why this is the answer. Or you can put that information in there, kind of however you want. I think I would probably send them to the page and say, you know, it's here, look and see if you can, you know, figure out why it is this answer. But nonetheless, you can set it up so that you aren't necessarily having to go through and grade, if you have 80 students in a class, 80 individual assignments every single time you want to have a low stakes assessment. You can set your quizzes up or set those assignments up so that students can get feedback from you very quickly, and you've got it set up ahead of time. The next thing, and this one I think either is going to be if you're face-to-face or if you're synchronous online. And that is if you are asking students a question and you've got a student that answers you and their answer isn't correct, maybe it's partially correct or maybe it's not even close, but don't just shut them down. Try rephrasing the question to that student and say, you know, you've started to kind of get it. Think about it this way, and then what do you think? So helping to not shut students down and giving them the comfort level to participate really can help them begin to open up, participate more in discussions, and really begin to you know, increase their own performance. And then again, or not again, but in addition, providing a range of learning activities. So we all know that we don't all learn in the same way or have preferences for learning in certain ways. Your students are the same. So if you can provide a variety of learning activities for them, from a chance to be creative by, you know, putting in a Flipgrid video as an assignment that they can turn in, or a discussion board where they get to write, or, you know, a small low stakes quiz or things like that. If you can adjust the different kinds of things you want them to do, it not only helps to keep them engaged, but it will also help your students feel like you're recognizing that they are different from one another. So, of course, this is one in which the student needs to understand that a high impact practice does include an investment of time and effort over an extended period of time. This is where having those frequent assessments along the way can really help to guide a student through the semester. So maybe you do have a big long-term project or paper. Rather than have them turn in a rough draft 2 weeks before it's due and do peer review at that point in time, and then have them turn around in a week and turn it back in for the final, spreading that out over the long term, so throughout the semester, as maybe you're going to start with, they're going to turn in their particular idea and they're going to get some feedback on that idea, and then the introduction, and so on and so forth. so that they're getting some consistent feedback throughout the semester so that they are putting in the time over the long term, and you'll see higher quality at the end. Again, those multiple consistent assignments and reading assignments. So one thing about reading assignments, we all tell our students read the textbook, and you know, I will sit down to read a textbook to review it for my class, and I find, you know, I'm drifting, right? If I'm not really focused on taking some extra notes or reviewing the notes that I already have, I do tend to drift, and most of our students do as well. So one thing that I have started to do for my students with their reading assignments is to provide them with a list of reading questions. These are highlights or points that you really want them to walk away with. Provide that list for them. They can complete that on their own. It's not for a grade. They don't turn it in my class. But what they will do is come back to class the next time, and they will have a quiz over that reading material. That way you've laid out for them what you expected them to get out of the reading, and now you're giving them an assessment on, you know, a short assessment that tells them whether they're actually understanding and getting the information out of the reading that you wanted them to. And then, as Jillian mentioned, and I certainly am a big proponent of this, is reflection on the material. Providing your students an opportunity to think about how they are doing, you know. And I ask a series of questions for my Bio 151 class. It's an introductory freshman class, so it goes very quick. We cover like 2 chapters a week. So once a week, I have a quiz that goes up on Canvas, and it's just a feedback quiz, and it's their opportunity to reflect. They're asked to tell me what is something new that they have learned. They tell me what is something that they do not understand still, and they tell me what it was that we did this past week that was most helpful for their learning. It gives them an opportunity to reflect. And in this case, it's outside of class, so there's no time limit. And I find that I have some students that, you know, very short little blurb, and then other students that will turn in a paragraph because they really have thought about what it is that's working for them and not working for them. So reflection can be a number of different things. That's just one method that I do tend to use. The next thing, and Jillian did mention this is interaction with faculty and peers about substantive matters. And there's a question that was in the Q&A about larger class sizes that I want to address as we walk through this. So to start with, let's talk about class discussion. So we try to have class discussions. Sometimes it can go well, sometimes it doesn't. The key, I think, is to try to develop your class discussions in a scaffolding manner. So first of all, start with a topical question. Don't ask students what they think. So if you've read an entire paper and your class discussion starts with, so what do you guys think about the paper? You're not going to get a whole lot. You need to guide the students through that paper and help them to pull out and understand the key points that you want them to understand. That doesn't mean you tell them, but you need to have framed the questions you want to ask them around what you are trying to get from the students. And then rather than open it up to the class at large, okay, especially if you've got a class of 50 or 80 students, give them a minute for each question to turn to their neighbor and talk to their neighbor about what they think about that particular question. Maybe they're in small groups already, so let the small groups have that discussion, and then turn it back to a broader class discussion. And if you do have a lot of students, it may not be that you actually have a full class discussion, but you have those discussions in those working groups. So that group work really is what focuses around the discussion. And you as a faculty member should be moving around the room and talking to the student groups, answering questions, but also posing additional questions to help them kind of express those different bits of information. And if you've got groups, it doesn't necessarily have as difficult, you won't have as difficult a time interacting with students when they're working in groups. So I taught a class last semester of about 70 students, and I had, I think, 17 or 18 student groups, and it was really not troublesome to get around to every single group, every single class period. And I had TAs as well to help, but to get around and talk to those groups every single class period and find out, how are you doing? What is this, particular question? What are you guys thinking about this? How is this working out for you? Do you understand this piece and why this comes in this way? So you can have those interactions as a faculty member in a larger class, depending on how you kind of frame your class space. One-on-one meetings. I realize this can be challenging if you have a larger class, but if you set it up so that it's, once a semester for every single person and it's just sort of spread it out across the semester, it may not be quite so bad. I actually took 10, 15 minutes out of a class one time after the first exam where the students I didn't think had done as well as what I had expected based on what I was hearing in their groups and the class discussions. And I just had them form a line, and one by one, they stopped by and they talked to me about how they studied on their way out of class. And I felt like a bit like a broken record, but one-on-one I said, okay, that's good, but let's try this next time. Let's add this next time. And it was just a really quick way to look each student in the eye and find out how they had studied and to give them a little bit of personal feedback. And then the last one is kind of what I mentioned before, is that faculty interaction during group work and discussions. That's really key so that the students don't feel like they're just sort of floundering and that they're turning in material maybe that they aren't sure about. They have a chance to bounce their ideas off of you and then further develop them in their answer.
Okay, we have a question, Denise.
Sure.
Susanna asks, how do you recommend doing that via Zoom and breakout rooms? It always felt disruptive to pop in.
To pop into a breakout room, right? Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit different feeling, certainly, but I think popping into those, as long as you tell them up front, while you're working on your group work, I'm going to be popping in. This doesn't mean that if you're off topic, I'm going to be angry. I expect that you guys are also going to be talking about other things, as long as you're getting your work done and you are using the space to also share about your latest stress with COVID or, your dog or, whatever it may be. Let them know ahead of time that it's okay to get off topic and, you're up for a funny story, once in a while too. So I think that helps so that when you pop in, they aren't feeling judged. That would be my suggestion.
And then Tamara had a suggestion. Another option to one-on-one is to meet 3 students at a time and discuss their rough drafts as an assignment together.
Okay. Yep. So meeting in small groups. Yeah, definitely. Especially if those meetings pertain to an assignment, directly to an assignment. Definitely. So this next one, students are exposed to and must contend with people and circumstances that differ from those with which they are familiar. Again, this comes back to that building of a better understanding of, from the student's perspective, of the other students around them. So when I talk about putting students into groups, those groups should be as diverse as possible. I always try to have the genders mixed, obviously, any kind of background that you can potentially identify, trying to make them diverse as possible tends to help not only open up, and expose students to other views, but can also help those students that maybe are feeling a little bit out, like they don't necessarily belong. If they have a small group of students that's willing to accept them and talk with them, it really helps to build their sense of belonging. And that's kind of within the classroom kind of piece. The next is, of course, if you can participate or encourage your students to participate in study abroad. We do have more virtual opportunities for study abroad this fall, so we can talk to the study abroad office and they can help put you in touch with some folks. And of course, in person would be lovely. It's an amazing opportunity for students. I teach one, and so I also understand that it can be incredibly expensive. I was on the internationalization committee this past year, and that was one of the big things that really I tried to emphasize, is that for us to really increase our study abroad beyond sort of our typical student group, we need to have funding for students. But if we can address some of those, study abroad is definitely something I think that helps our students to really open up. So This one I know can be challenging: frequent, timely, and constructive feedback. So frequent, of course, it depends on the course structure, but it needs to reflect the pace of the course. If you're in a course like I was, that, you know, you're doing 2 chapters a week, you know, if you're giving feedback, it's got to be fast. So that's where those quizzes with the feedback built in come into place. So if the student picks answer B and that's not the right answer, you've got a prepped response in there that helps them to better understand why that wasn't, or where to go to understand what it is. Timely. So assignments, you know, if you're doing lab reports, for example, and you have a lab report that's due here this week, and then you have another lab report due the following week, but you haven't given them any feedback, you haven't returned that lab report, you cannot expect the student to have improved from this lab report to this lab report. So you're kind of defeating the purpose of having them write additional lab reports or materials, whatever it is. You need to give them time to read that feedback. And yes, I know they don't always read the feedback. I still get students that I've given great feedback and they have all the information and they still do the same thing on the next assignment. That's on them. You've given them the feedback, you've given it to them in a timely manner, and it's up to them to take that next step to address that in their next assignment. And then the constructive nature, right? So don't just put, you know, missed a point or missed 5 points or, you know, this is terrible. That, you know, not that any of us do that sort of thing, but make sure that the feedback you're giving them is actually constructive and helpful. And this certainly will help them improve on their next assignment. Again, this is that going back to reflecting again. And in addition to reflecting on their learning, understanding the integration of their learning. So if we look here first, compartmentalization, courses are often seen as standalone, right? They don't connect with other courses, or maybe they don't connect with a student's prior experiences, either a job or an internship. So we can help them by trying to help make those kinds of connections for them, asking them, you know, what job have you had that seems to really reflect or match with some of the topics we've discussed here, or helps you to better understand, or, you know, how does it change your viewpoint on this particular topic because you've been out and had a job or an internship. So helping them to reduce that compartmentalization, connecting things. The next thing that can actually lead a little bit to compartmentalization, although in general they can be really useful, are these digital tools, of course. So we have Canvas and we have Blackboard. Those kinds of things are very school oriented, right? So all of my school material is in there. I have discussions, but they're very set kinds of things. And then I have Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and, you know, whatever else it is, where that's social, right? So that's the social side of things. So if we can work in some way to help them connect their everyday life with their school life, not that you need to be on Instagram or anything like that, but helping them to say, you know, hey, what's something interesting that you've seen posted on Instagram that pertains to our topic? Or in the case of things like COVID right now, what's something that you've seen posted on Instagram that sounds totally, utterly ridiculous conspiracy theory that, you know, we could look at from, you know, a different point of view and see how that fits with what we've been talking about. So helping them to connect those two parts can really help. And then, of course, as we mentioned before, that we need to increase their opportunities for reflection. They need to be able to reflect on what they have learned, what is still difficult for them, and then to think about how those different materials that they've learned can apply in the future, and how they pulled on information from the past. So it's not that you stand there and tell them, because they don't want to hear it from you. They need to have the opportunity to think about that, and you can direct them by asking them questions about it. So opportunities to discover the relevance of their learning through real world applications. So yeah, it's great to talk about how you can use this in real life, but if you can actually show them, it makes it that much more relevant and real. So things like the service learning or Mayerson projects certainly give students an opportunity to really apply the different things that they've learned, to think about how what they understand can be used to help others. Research is a great way. Creative activity falls right under that as well. So anything that you can do to help a student actually apply the knowledge that they've learned in class will help them solidify their understanding. And then, as we talked about before, those internships and those co-ops. One thing that Jillian didn't talk about that I think is really important, and something that I'm actually testing right now with a grant, is job shadowing. As freshmen, companies really aren't sure about having students come in to do internships or co-ops. They just don't have the skill set yet. But one thing they do seem to be open to is having students come in for what we've termed shadowing, job shadowing. We could also do research shadowing. So students come in and they spend 4 to 6 hours, it's kind of up to the company, talking with different folks in the company about what their educational background was, you know, what they majored in, what they do for their job. What does that entail? Maybe there's a tour that's involved, you know, if they're working for an industry and there's something hands-on that they can see. But basically, it's an introduction to the different opportunities, right? Because you say, okay, I'm majoring in computer science. Well, what does that mean for a career? It means a whole lot of things, and probably a whole lot of things that you've never even thought of. So providing them with kind of that opportunity for shadowing during that freshman year can be, we think, can be really helpful. One thing, of course, that we're struggling with this year with our grant is that the shadowing is quite likely going to need to be virtual. So if you're interested to know how that goes for us, just shoot me an email later this semester, and I'll either come cry on your shoulder or I will be cheering and jumping up and down because companies were so excited to help. So we don't know what that outcome will be yet, of course, but we are hoping that even a virtual opportunity to see what people do will help our students. And then the public demonstration of competence. So yes, we have opportunities on campus for students to present things at Celebration. We also have the summer celebration for students in STEM, but it doesn't have to be a big presentation at a meeting. It can be a class presentation, something for them to be able to get up in front of the class and articulate what they have learned and explain the material to their peers. They may be making a presentation of their work or their project to the nonprofit in service learning. This is a great opportunity for them to move beyond the classroom essentially, but still in a pretty low stakes, small group setting. So you're not presenting at a meeting where there's, 150 people. So there are different opportunities for students to get up and present. And the more often we can help them do that, the better off they are going to be for sure. So one thing that I wanted to, so that's the list, say that sort of finishes the list. So I think before we all start to feel overwhelmed that we have to include all of these in every single HIP, I wanted to pull up some data from a presentation, and I have a link to it, that McCormick and colleagues put together. And this is based on literature review, looking at where, in terms of which HIPs, okay, are we emphasizing certain high impact practice qualities? So in other words, our public demonstration of competence, probably not in the first year experience or the first year seminar, right? And maybe or maybe not for study abroad. It sort of depends. For my class, they do happen to have a presentation at the end of the study abroad while we're there still on site. And I know there are other study abroad groups that when they come back, they do presentations that are open to the public. So that certainly is one that we do. But you can see if it's 2 pluses, it's something that they are finding in multiple studies. And then the single plus just means that they're finding it in fewer studies. So what I wanted this to show is that you don't have to do every single thing in every single HIP that you do. There are certain things that need, of course, to be emphasized more than others. So what does this look like? So as a couple of examples, here's first year seminar course and out of class activities where they're attending some kind of enrichment event, right? So maybe there's a lecture or there's an assignment that ends up being facilitated by a peer mentor. They're meeting with a peer mentor. So they're getting that substantive interaction with faculty and peers here. So that's one example of something that we may see that students could do as part of that first year seminar experience. Our internship and capstone projects, maybe they are submitting that portfolio or artifacts that helps to tell the greater public what they've learned, what kind of knowledge they've learned, what kind of proficiencies or skills have they gained. Those kinds of things can be included in a capstone, whereas that's probably not going to be something that's appropriate for a first year type of experience. And then again, back to that oral presentation, the capstone or the undergraduate research. So those kinds of things definitely fit well with some sort of public demonstration of competence. Creative activities certainly fall very easily into the same idea as research, where they have a public demonstration of what they're doing and their competence. The last thing I added quickly once Jillian had put this up is the IUPUI site on taxonomies, because this is it's great. It's a really wonderful site. My question is, can you see it? And I don't think you can. Hang on.
We couldn't see it.
Oh, I didn't think so, because of course I switched it. There we go. Okay. So this is the IUPUI, and it's called the RISE Initiative. So when you see that come up in Google, it'll say the RISE program or the RISE Initiative. That's the right place. You can go ahead and click on that. And then you get the taxonomies down here. So these are the high impact practices that they've actually developed, that taxonomy that Jillian was talking about. So they have one for capstones and e-portfolios, first year seminars. They don't have one for collaborative learning. They are probably missing some others that I'm not noticing right off the top, but they are continually adding to these. So if we take a look at the one for capstones, here is what it'll pull up for you. Can you still see that, Ashley?
We are seeing a blank screen.
Ooh, helpful.
It had like your internet, but it said about blank on it.
Great.
There we go. Oh.
Yeah? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see stuff about capstones now.
Okay, perfect. So are you seeing a table that has the attribute high impact, higher impact across the top?
No, we see what is capstones, why capstones.
Got it.
Okay, definitions.
Yeah, I'm moving. Okay, I had to figure out which one I was supposed to be moving. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
So these are the taxonomies that she was talking about. And so if you are working on a capstone, this doesn't mean that you have to come in and start your capstone at the highest impact level. Come in, have your capstone designed and in front of you, and see, where are you? Where do you fall on this taxonomy? What kinds of things are you offering that fit under high impact or higher impact, and work your way up. You don't have to start at the highest level. We're looking, when we talk about increasing the access to high impact practices and increasing the impact value of them, part of that is understanding that it's a process. So you need to cut yourself some slack and understand that making it work over time to become the highest impact level is absolutely perfect. So using some of these gives you kind of a structure for how you might make your high impact practice even better. So these, like I said, are laid out. If you have questions additionally about how maybe you can implement it that might end up being different than what IUPUI does, or for that matter, different online than face-to-face this semester, feel free to reach out to either myself or Ellen, and we're happy to provide some more suggestions and details. And also the folks at Site are awesome for when we're moving things online, and will help you as well. So I want to end there at that point and take questions if people have them. I'll make sure we leave some time for that. But again, just think of this as a process. Do we have questions, Ashley? I see some.
No, not right now. Teresa Huber says, our study abroad to Cuba includes a presentation before the trip and after we return.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. And again, if it's just to the class, that's wonderful. We do something kind of similar so everybody knows what everybody's project is when we go out of the country.
Yeah, but there's really no other questions unless anybody has some. Go ahead and put them in the chat. People are saying very helpful. Thank you.
Good. So again, the PowerPoint itself, the recording, and then the links to the IUPUI page will be up on Canvas. And again, if you're interested in really learning more and discussing more about high impact practices, certainly consider signing up for the educator learning community on high impact practices. This is the kind of place that our discussions are likely to go, is this direction.
Okay, we did have something pop up from Megan Downing. I just wanted to mention that the mini reflection quizzes you mentioned early in the presentation sound very similar to the minute papers I used in my face-to-face class. Thanks for the suggestion. Sounds like a great avenue to duplicate the minute paper in online hybrid classes.
Yeah, and you can set it up in Canvas so that it is a, I think it's called a feedback survey, and then it sets it up where it's not worth any points, or you can set it up so it's worth a point or something to encourage the students to do it. But then they can go in and take the time outside of class. Because I know I would try to do the minute reflection paper in class, and sometimes a minute just isn't long enough. So this way they have 3 questions to think about, and yeah.
Okay, Tamara says the speaker talked about consistency. How do we achieve that consistency across disciplines, years, etc.?
So I think consistency in across disciplines, I think, is going to come back to really the broader assessments that we can put in place to look at how these different things are playing out. So looking at the NESI survey, but maybe even doing some additional questions in our senior surveys that we get every single year to look at how students from different disciplines are experiencing high impact practices. That gives us some feedback. We also, as part of our high impact practices sort of working group, are trying to look at ways in which we can have people give us artifacts so that we have an idea of what people are using in each discipline, and we can work to build kind of a place where people can go and look for examples, right? So that there's a repository, that's the word, where people can go and look for examples that they might be able to bring into their class. And they can look across disciplines or things like that. And in terms of consistency across years, it is true that you want to be consistent in your expectations and things like that. But if you start the first year and you expect that you have to keep it exactly like that as you continue, I think that defeats the purpose a little bit. You want to give yourself room to make changes to how you are doing your high impact practice, right? You don't want to feel like you have to make it perfect the first time around and not allow yourself the ability to change it. So make sure that consistency does not interrupt your ability to make improvements, I guess is the way I want to say that. Oh, I see. Sorry, consistency there, not years without a hip. Right. So one of the things that we are trying to do is identify classes ultimately that have a high impact practice, well identified, and that has gone through some sort of review process, so that, you know, just like I forget which university it was that she mentioned, had done that, and they had those classes tagged, and then students actually got a notation on their transcript. That's something that we would like to work toward, is having that as an identifier for our students. Yes. Any other questions? All right, then, we are at 11:10, and I am going to go ahead and say thank you all so very much. And we still have another set of talks coming up if you'd like to join us, but a 10-minute break. Thanks. Thanks, Ashley.